Have you ever just stopped to think about what invisible forces are actually dictating your life and, your personal wealth? I mean, we all go to work, right? We earn our paychecks, we strive for a good life. But beneath the surface of those daily routines, there are these vast, completely unseen architectures that literally define what our time, our property, and even our souls are actually worth. Today, we're going to explore how drastically that definition changes depending on who you ask. And honestly, the answers are probably going to surprise you. Okay, consider this absolutely wild contrast for a second. On one side, we have the early 20th century poet Khalil Gibran. He suggests that human value and true fortune are found only in simplicity and spiritual connection. Pretty beautiful, right? But then on the absolute other end of the spectrum, we have John C. Williams. He's a modern central banker, and he measures our collective economic potential mathematically through the cold, hard lens of the short-term real interest rate. It's a staggering juxtaposition. How on earth can two people look at the exact same human experience and measure its worth in such fundamentally opposite ways?
Well, in this explainer, we're going to dive right into that. We are journeying through three radically different paradigms of value, wealth, and systemic control. Let's get into it. We're going to start things off in the spiritual realm, grounded in the sweeping, beautiful poetry of the Lebanese writer Khalil Gibran. Gibran was an absolute master at using really accessible parables to expose the raw and honestly sometimes uncomfortable truths of human nature. Throughout his work, he constantly wrestles with this bitter struggle between the purity of the human soul and the corrupting influence of the modern world. For Gibran, the ultimate currency of our lives is spiritual integrity, and he sees that as something incredibly fragile when it gets ground up in the mechanics of civilization.
Now, what's really fascinating here is how Gibran views our intrinsic human value as something that is constantly under siege by the heavy chains of the material world. In his poem Song of Fortune, he actually personifies fortune. He describes it as an entity that desperately craves humanity, but it's constantly blocked by this rival named substance. Basically, we seek fortune in the loud, clamorous city, locking ourselves in a dungeon of selfishness and, as he puts it, painful chains of gold, endlessly chasing more stuff. But Gibran argues that true fortune, that only exists in the holy of holies of life, a quiet place of spiritual contentment, affection, and simplicity. It is a stark reminder that what society tells us to value is often the exact opposite of what our souls actually need.
And this whole dynamic is brilliantly illustrated in his story, The Criminal. Get this, a starving youth begs for bread, literally just trying to survive, but society completely rejects him simply because he's poor. Pushed right to the absolute brink, he makes a weapon and violently takes what he needs, crushing anyone in his way. But here is the tragic, twisted irony of the story. Once he amasses all the stolen wealth, the local ruler actually appoints him as a deputy. Society's selfishness forces a peaceful soul into violent greed and then turns around and rewards that very corruption with political power. In Gibran's worldview, our obsession with material wealth actively destroys the human soul. It really makes you wonder how often we celebrate people who have compromised their own humanity just to get ahead, doesn't it?
All right, so while Gibran looked at control through this deeply spiritual and societal lens, we're going to do a massive pivot now. We're stepping into an entirely different architecture of reality, an esoteric legal perspective based on the analysis by Santos Bonacci. According to the framework presented by Bonacci, the capture of human value isn't just a metaphor, it is literal. He claims the Vatican captured human wealth and souls through a series of ancient papal bulls rolled out over centuries. In 1302, Pope Boniface VIII issued Unam Sanctum, which this theory claims created the very first express trust, basically declaring ownership of all souls on earth. Then, decades later in 1455, Romanus Pontifex allegedly claimed all global real estate. And finally, in 1481, Attorney Regis supposedly established the Commonwealth. Bonacci proposes that these aren't just dusty old history documents. He claims they are active, foundational legal structures still running the world today, secretly dictating the limits of our personal sovereignty.
So, the absolute linchpin of this entire perspective is something called the Cestui Que Vie Trust. Bonacci asserts that the exact moment you are born, the state uses your birth certificate to register you, and by doing so, legally claims your soul and your future property. According to this fringe view, those three historical trusts we just talked about combine to create a massive system where all of humanity's wealth is held in corporate bondage by an elite class. Just think about the implications of that for a second. Under this framework, you don't truly own your house, your car, or even your own name. It's all just a legal fiction managed by the state. In this paradigm, your entire existence is basically just generating dividends for a system you never even knew you were a part of. And it gets even wilder, because this esoteric framework actually extends right into our modern court system. The theory claims that walking into a courtroom is actually participating in an ancient religious ritual designed to monetize your sins. Bonacci argues that courts function as ecclesiastical oratories. The judge, they're acting as an ordinary priest. The trial itself, it's a sacrament of penance. When you stand up and state your name in court, this theory suggests you are unwittingly confessing as a beneficiary, allowing the state to extract literal, hard financial value from your secret trust account. It literally reimagines the entire justice system from a place of civil law into an architecture of spiritual and financial extraction. Okay, leaving the legal fringe theories behind, let's step into the cold, hard, data-driven reality of the modern era. We're talking about central banking and macroeconomics. Here, we're zeroing in on the core of John C. Williams' speech to the Group of 30. Specifically, we have to look at this drastically low estimate right here, 0 to 1.5%. This is the current estimate for the modern neutral interest rate in advanced economies. Now, what is that? The neutral rate is basically the short-term real interest rate that keeps an economy operating at its full potential without overheating inflation. To put it simply, it's the Goldilocks zone of the economy, not too hot, not too cold. And right now, sitting near zero, it is stunningly low. For any economist trying to chart our financial future, that number sounds an immediate blaring alarm bell. To put this into perspective, just look at the historical data. Over the past half-century, the neutral rate hovered safely around 2 to 2.5%. But today, it's plummeted down to that 0 to 1.5% range. Now, you might be wondering, okay, so what? Why does this matter to my everyday life? Well, it is absolutely crucial. Because when a recession hits, central banks rely on cutting interest rates to stimulate the economy, basically making borrowing cheaper to get money moving again. But with the neutral rate already sitting near zero, that historical cushion they used to have, it has completely evaporated. They literally don't have the room to lower rates enough to fight off a severe economic downturn. And that leaves your savings, your job, and the whole broader economy highly exposed. So what exactly caused this massive tectonic shift? Williams identifies 3 global trends from the past 25 years as the main culprits. First up, demographics. Our populations are aging and birth rates are falling globally, which fundamentally changes how societies save and spend. Second, there's been a persistent worldwide slowdown in productivity growth. People just aren't getting more efficient at the same historical rates. And third, there is a heightened global demand for safe, liquid assets, which widens the gap between secure government bonds and riskier investments. And here's the kicker. Williams notes these aren't just temporary blips. These shifts happened before the financial crisis and are likely our new normal. The very foundation of global economic growth has changed. Which brings us to a massive problem. How does the Federal Reserve actually propose to manage our wealth when their traditional tools are completely constrained by this lower bound? Well, if inflation consistently undershoots its target during recessions, the public's expectations for future inflation will actually drop. This creates a vicious psychological cycle. Monetary policy ends up constantly swimming upstream. Think about it. When people expect prices to stay flat or even drop, they hold on to their cash, they stop spending, and that further stalls the economy. Because of this terrifying loop, central banks desperately need alternative strategies to protect the value of our currency. So, Williams outlines 3 specific alternative frameworks to stop those inflation expectations from slipping dangerously low. Step 1 is maintaining the current framework but relying heavily on aggressive conventional and unconventional actions the moment a downturn hits, basically throwing everything at the wall immediately. Step 2 is average inflation targeting. This is where the central bank purposefully aims for above-target inflation during boom times just to offset the low inflation during busts. And step 3 is price level targeting, where they commit to keeping the overall price level on a steadily growing path, promising to mathematically make up for any shortfalls later on. Guys, these are highly complex, massive levers being pulled behind the scenes just to manage what the dollars in your bank account are actually worth. Let's bring this all together. When we place the poet, the esoteric legal theorist, and the central banker side by side, it is a fascinating lineup. For Gibran, human value comes from the intrinsic soul, and it's controlled and corrupted by material greed. For Bonacci, our value has been converted into a fictional corporate trust, controlled by ancient decrees and modern court systems. And for Williams, value is a mathematical utility, controlled and stabilized by central banks tweaking interest rates. These are 3 entirely distinct lenses through which to view human existence. Each one offers a radically different map of the invisible forces shaping our lives. As we wrap up this explainer, you really have to ask yourself, after seeing these wildly different architectures of reality, who do you believe actually owns your future? Are we spiritual beings fighting the corruption of gold? Are we legal fictions generating wealth for ancient institutions? Or are we simply data points in a macroeconomic equation managed by central banks? The answer you land on might just change how you view your own worth tomorrow. Thanks so much for joining this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning the systems around you.